Okay, so first of all, a lot of exciting developments here. Isn't this is so like whatever. I got this at Five Below. Isn't this just the cutest thing? I love a little silly straw moment. So that's super cute. And then I got this because, my Trixie mirror broke, so I had to get this little cute mirror. This is also from Five Below. It's supposed to light up, but honestly, with these like stage lights, I think I'm okay for lighting. So this is going to be, oh, and I also got this at like Marshall's, which is going to have a 5x zoom, or I think 10x zoom. How high does this go? It goes to it's a pretty big zoom, 3x zoom, which honestly for me, when I'm doing my eyeshadow, I kind of need because I can't see very well. So if I'm looking, in various places, please know I am not ignoring you. I just need to be able to see what I'm doing. Ooh, I haven't done a thwarp in so long. Hello, sinners, and hail Sappho. It's your hostess with the mostest, Narcissa DeVille. And if you're new to my channel, hello. I do weekly, trying to do twice a week, but it's not going so well so far. But I did it once, so, progress, where I do kind of different things. I do a lot of art videos, I do some reviews, I do some makeup chats, and this week I'm gonna actually be doing a femme makeup chat, but also talking about a little writing experiment that I did, because as you know, I've been watching more, well, if you saw one of my last videos, you would know that I was watching some writertube, I think that's right? Writer YouTube videos where the person was talking about writing like certain, or basically doing like writing exercises of like trying to write like XYZ author, doing their writing program, or like how they write, basically their writing. I cannot think of the word. Routine. Why was the word routine just gone from my head? So doing other writers' writing routine. I was genuinely curious because, as I mentioned in a previous video, I don't really have a writing routine. I've never, I've written for 20 years, but I've never had what I would call a routine. I sort of just write whenever. And so I was genuinely curious, like, okay, if I force myself to have a routine, what does that actually mean for me as a writer? What changes for me as a writer if I have an actual routine? And so I kind of wanted to just talk about my experience with that, what I did and how it turned out, basically. So I decided to do, because it's kind of, I think, I don't know if it's the simplest one, but it just was the first one that I saw, so this is what I went with, was the Stephen King writer routine, which is basically, there's kind of different ways. I did this not quite exactly like Stephen King, but the challenge is basically, he likes to write, a chapter per day while he's working on a project, which is roughly like 3,000 words, I think he said. Now, he also likes to make sure that when he's writing that chapter, that it is, pretty much a finalized draft. So that is not something that I was doing, I'll be honest with you, because I don't like to edit as I'm writing, and that's, honestly, that could be its own video. I've done it before. It's not like something that I can't do. It's just not something that I prefer to do. So that aspect of it, I really did not do. I also did not do exactly the 3,000 words, because for me, the story that I'm writing, the chapters are actually closer to 2,300 words. It kind of depends, but that's kind of what I tried to strive for, was like 2,300 words. So, I did it my way, but also in the style of Stephen King. That was kind of the point for me. I think this was kind of an interesting experiment, right? Because there was a couple of things that I went into this experiment wanting. Number one of which was, I have had, for a long time now, I've had a very just bad sleep schedule. Like, it's really appalling, my sleep schedule. I kind of went into this with two plans, right? I went into this with the plan that I want to try and make my sleep schedule better, you know? I went into it with that goal. But I also went into it with the goal that I wanted to obviously get more writing done than I had been doing previously. And I think those were kind of my main goals, is like fix my sleep schedule, try out this writing thing, and then also get more writing done. I was not sure how this was going to go, because part of this too, right, is that I decided not only am I going to challenge myself to write a certain word count, rather than letting myself just write whenever I feel like it, I wanted to do a specific time where I sat down and said, okay, you know, on Monday through Friday, I am going to write from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And, you know, that's what I'm going to give myself to get this chapter done. And that's about 2 hours. So I figured that's a good amount of time to, you know, write that. I'm usually pretty fast as a writer. So I figured, you know, 2 hours, 2,300 words, that seems like an easy enough thing to do, right? So the first day, and I did actually write notes of kind of my thoughts and my experiences. And the first day I decided I'm going to really go for this. I'm going to go totally outside of my comfort zone. You know, one of the things that I do, and I think this is probably why I have such a, you know, kind of crap sleep schedule, or sleep, you know, issues with insomnia and stuff like that, is because I have this really unfortunate habit of writing in bed. I usually write either in bed or like on the couch or something like that. I don't, you know, I have this office where I do all my filming. It also, you know, is where I do day job stuff and all of that. But I end up doing a lot of my writing like just in bed. And that's not advisable, I would say. I know there's been a lot of people who are like sleep experts who are like, yeah, you know, you really shouldn't write in bed because when you do that, you like train your brain to think of, you know, bed as also work time instead of sleep time. It's like a whole thing, right? I know that I should not be doing that, right? I logistically know that I should not be working in bed. So I decided, okay, I'm going to not only challenge myself to write at a specific time, I'm also going to challenge myself to write in my office. I'm going to go outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to write in my office, and that will help my sleep schedule because, you know, I'm writing in the space that you're supposed to. Did not realize for myself that because I am so unaccustomed to writing in that space generally, it was really difficult to get the writing done. I have to say, like, I eventually did get there, but to say that I struggled that first day, and maybe it was also because I was doing a lot of different things that I had never done before. You know, I wasn't just writing in a new space, I was also writing at a new time. I was also in that kind of headspace of like, I am doing something that is outside of how I normally write. And so I think there is that subconscious thing that probably was making it a little bit more difficult than it needed to be. And again, this is all kind of like in your head. But that first day was like very challenging for me. And at first I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make this goal. Like it was just kind of a lot of things going on in my head that I was just like, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how this process is going to go, or if this is something I can even like continue. So it was just like not a great start, but I managed to make my goal. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to consider that a win. I made it. I wrote the amount that I needed to. And then the second day I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do this in bed, but I am going to do this on the couch. So at least it's like a similar space. So I don't feel like I've changed everything up. And then, you know, it's a struggle again. And that time it was a lot easier. I think day 2 was a lot easier. Day 3, I believe there was some kind of, I can't really remember, but I remember there being some kind of like issue on day 3 where, I think I had to, was that the day that I had to call someone and I ended up like being super late? And I did get it written, but it was not at the normal time. And, you know, it kind of proved that like life comes up and sometimes you're just not gonna get to write at the exact time that you want, because sometimes things just come up and there's just nothing you can do about that. So that was like, whatever. Like, I wasn't that upset about that, but I was kind of like, you know, it throws off my game a little bit. That's unfortunate, but you know, you get over it, because that's kind of what you have to realize when you're doing something like this, is that life is going to come up. So, you know, I did it Monday through Friday. By the last day, I think I pretty much had it set. I knew what I was doing. I wasn't really struggling that much by the last day, because I was kind of like, yeah, I've been doing this really regularly. I was able to get it. And actually, I think by like the last day, I really was able to write it in like 1 hour instead of the 2 hours that I had set aside for myself. So I was pretty proud that I was kind of getting like, and that day I think I was in my office too. So I like managed to write it really fast, and I was in the office. So I was really doing everything. But I will say it did not improve my sleep schedule at all. And you know, I don't know why that is. I don't know, you know, maybe a week is not enough time to truly improve a sleep schedule. Maybe it's something I need to keep doing, because I know in order for something to become a habit, you kind of have to do it for at least 30 days, I believe. So there pretty much was probably no way it was ever going to become a habit just doing it for a week. But it was kind of just an experiment to see how it would go. I kind of did this as like an actual science experiment, and I do happen to have a writing tracker, so I do actually have the numbers for all of this, and I do have kind of the data. And I will say, from what I can tell, I did actually write 30% more writing this way than I was previously. Here's the thing, right? Yes, I wrote 30% more. And in a way, there is part of me that liked having a actual, like, dedicated time where I, you know, kind of set aside to write. And I was saying that I was going to do it 5 days a week, so that I do have, like, you know, 2 days where I'm not having to write, because I think it's just realistic. You know, if you're not doing writing full time, I think giving yourself days off where you're doing something else is probably a good idea. And because I'm still working on, this happened to be an original novel that I'm working on, but I'm also working on a fanfic, so I spent my 2 days off, which was Saturday and Sunday, catching up on this fanfic that I'm writing, because it's a longer fic. And that one I wrote 12,000 words in 2 days, versus with my original novel, I wrote 11,000 words in those 4 days. So, you know, and I would say, and by the way, I wrote those, you know, doing my regular schedule of whenever I wanted. So like 3 a.m. I will say, I do think, and this is maybe this will be a controversial take, I do think writing fan fiction is a little bit easier than writing original fiction. And I say that because I do feel like, I mean, there's differences, right? There's parts where it's easier and parts where it's harder. It's harder because if it's a relatively known world, I think people have their own ideas of what these characters are like and how they talk and how they interact, and that can be interesting to live up to, because it's like, you know, the last thing you want is for someone to tell you the old, they would not say that. And I've definitely had that thought while reading something. I'm like, they would not say that, they would not do that, so I don't like this. But I will just stop reading. I'm not going to comment that, because there's really no need. But I know some people probably would comment that, so I don't ever want to create that thought in someone reading my work. So there is kind of that added pressure of like not wanting to write something that is so far outside of what's going to be expected by readers that it's like completely a turnoff. That's kind of on your head when you're writing fan fiction. But at the same time, there is the added benefit of, because everyone knows these characters and because everyone knows the story and the world and just kind of all of these background things that you don't have to think about. You don't have to think about character names. You don't have to research where people are from, because if you know as much as, you know, the rest of the fandom, which usually if you're writing about it, you do, there isn't that added like layer of, I have to learn these things. I have to figure this out. I have to figure out who these people are and what they want, what their motivations are and what they're doing. You know, there's so many things that go into writing an original novel, especially. And, you know, that's not something within fanfic unless you're writing a AU. But even then, you know, it's characters people already love. They already know the storylines. They already know the beats. They kind of know what's going to happen. So you really don't have that added pressure of like, I have to figure out like who these characters are, what they want. I have to figure out all this information. That isn't a thing in a fanfic. It's all kind of just done. And I feel like that takes off a bit of pressure, and you feel you know these characters enough. There isn't that added pressure to like create a whole new world. It's all kind of just there for you. And I think that makes things a lot easier as a writer. Whereas when it's an original novel, even if it's something you've been working on for a while, you ultimately have to, you know, figure out a way to introduce concepts and themes and characters to people who don't otherwise know them for the first time. That can be really daunting and a lot of work, even for an experienced author. That just takes time to figure out, how do I want to explore this world? How do I want to explain these characters? So ultimately, I find for me, I really had to say, okay, you know, I think it's a different experience, right? In some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder to write fanfic. So I think I'm faster with fanfic because it's just, there's so much shorthand that I don't have to explain. You know what I mean? There is just a lot of things that are just kind of a given. So what that means ultimately is that by the numbers, writing a certain period of the day, so from 10 to 2, or no, 10 to 1, excuse me. Why did I say 10 to 2? 10 to 1, writing, you know, straight through. I'm not editing it, I'm just writing it. I'm just trying to get it down so I have a draft that's completed, and then I'll work on editing later. I was able to do that, and I was able to write about 11,000 words, or no, a little over 11,000. Whereas when I was doing it kind of my own way and in my own time, I wrote about 7,200 words. About 35% is what I mathed. That's what I was able to do the math on, that it was about 35% better more that I wrote, which is like a not insignificant amount. I will say for the most part, I do think I like having a set writing time. That was very different for me. I think having a time where I say, okay, I have to sit down and write, I think that was very different. And it was challenging, but in a good way. I don't feel like it was a challenge that I was not prepared for, if you will. And again, I didn't do it quite the Stephen King method, because obviously that does require you to edit it as you go. I have done the editing as you go thing. And I don't know how I feel about it. I will say there is part of me that likes the idea of writing as I go editing as I go, like instead of doing it chapter by chapter, every maybe 5 or 10 chapters. And the reason for that is because I think when you're doing edits, it's really annoying to do all that all at once. That's, to me, editing is always the most grueling part of the process. And by the way, there's different edits. I think I kind of using the terminology wrong. Some people say line by line edit is a different thing from a developmental edit, which is, you kind of gotta look at the story in broad strokes and make sure that it all works. My point is, I do kind of feel part of me does want to edit as I go and kind of just see what happens, but I do want to kind of just get as much of it done. That's why I wanted to do this writing thing of I'm going to make myself write a chapter a day, 5 days a week. And, like I said, 35% is nothing to sniff at. I did, for the most part, like having a writing schedule. But on the flip side, one of the other things that I really wanted was I was hoping it would positively affect my sleep schedule, which ultimately I don't necessarily think that it did. And that's not entirely the fault of the writing thing. I'm putting a lot on it to expect it to fix my sleep schedule. But, it is kind of the drawback of well, is there really a point to me writing at a specific time of day as opposed to just writing, at 3 or 4 in the morning the way I normally would? I don't really know. I don't know if that makes a difference to me. I usually do feel like I'm a little more creative at night. I feel like writing comes more easily to me in the evening. I think a lot of writers say that because there's just something about the nighttime. It's quieter. There's not really the same distractions. Although, I mean, if you're on YouTube, there's distractions 24/7. That does not sleep. And even with television, you know, there's a lot of channels that go 24/7 nowadays. So that kind of doesn't fly as much. But I feel like there's not the same distractions of like, you know, one of the things that I found funny that first day on that Monday was I was suddenly getting, everyone wanted to text me, everyone wanted to message me and talk to me, and everyone needed my attention. And I know that's something that a lot of writers complain about who write full time is like, you know, you set aside this writing time for yourself and then suddenly everyone needs your attention at once. So that is something that's just kind of an experience that writers have to deal with. And I feel like when you're writing at night, there really isn't that problem, because unless you're talking to someone who's also a night owl like you, or who lives in another country where it's daytime, technically speaking, when it's nighttime for me, most everyone else is going to be asleep, so they're not going to be bugging me. So I think that is kind of one of the things too, is like, I do feel like to an extent, part of the reason it's easier to write at night is because everyone else is asleep, because there is not so many people who require your attention later at night. I think editing is like probably its own video, so if you'd like to see me talk about like my editing process and kind of how that goes, and maybe do an experiment of like editing chapters as I go, just as like a different writing experiment, if you enjoy this video and would like to see how that affects my work, I'd be happy to do that just to kind of see how that goes. For the purposes of this video, I am going to say doing Stephen King's writing routine, but I would say it's kind of his routine. It was more I wrote one chapter a day and I wrote it during a specific time period, so that could be really any writer's routine. But I did call it the Stephen King one because it was specifically supposed to be like a certain word count too. So anyway, yeah, I mean, that's the video. This is the look. So this was my experiment writing in a sort of Stephen King-esque structure. Would I continue? Maybe. I don't know. Would you like to see more videos like this where I try other writers' routines? Would you like to see a whole dedicated video to me talking about either editing as I'm writing a chapter, like writing a chapter and then editing it immediately and kind of like doing that? If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like this video, comment down below. You can also subscribe to my channel. You can also become a member of my channels. I have two tiers, the Our Side tier and the Ineffable tier. The Ineffable tier does get emotes when I go live, and then the Our Side tier does get early access to videos and some behind the scenes stuff too that I'll be doing. And you can also become a member of my Patreon, patreon.com/narcissistiville. My members only behind the scenes channel. I'm going to be using that a lot more going forward because I'm going to have a lot more stuff coming, so stay tuned for that. Yeah, and until next time, stay devilish and see you next Tuesday.